Hi, I'm Tom from Life 4.0, and welcome to our first video in our series on installing solar. If you're a regular subscriber to our channel, you're probably used to our sailing and travel adventure videos. And in the sailboats that we've shown in those videos, you might have noticed that we're a big proponent of solar power. Well, we've brought that pursuit onshore and recently completed a ground-mounted solar system at our home, as shown behind me. This series of 7 videos walks you through step-by-step of all phases of the project, from design and permitting to sourcing the materials to the actual hands-on construction of each part of the assembly. When I started this project, I found that there was a lot of general information around solar, but not a lot of details around the construction. I hope this series of videos shows you that it's really not that difficult to do this kind of project and gives you a lot of satisfaction of doing the work yourself. I'm not a professional contractor by any means. I'm just a general handyman and familiar with most power tools. And if I can do this kind of project, likely you can too. And for our regular subscribers, please let us know if you enjoy this kind of content. In the meantime, we'll be back with our normal sailing videos after this series is over. So let's dive in. We live in a pretty leafy suburb of New Hampshire, and trees cause a lot of shading on our property, so my main concern was where to locate the solar panels. You can certainly hire companies to do this assessment, but I wanted to do it myself and have confidence that there was no bias in the numbers. So I started by taking time-lapsed aerial pictures of our house using my drone. I did this in November and in March. With the sun low in the sky in November, it would give us an approximation of the worst-case scenario for shading. The March pictures would give me an idea of shading during the spring and fall. For the summer, I wasn't too concerned about shading with the sun so high in the sky. The first thing to consider is determining where south is. If you're in the northern hemisphere, you're going to want to ideally orient your solar panels facing directly south to get the best exposure throughout the day. As you follow this November time lapse, you'll see that we have very limited sun on the roof. With this option ruled out, I started looking for a ground-mounted location, zeroing in on the most northern area of our property, with therefore the best exposure to the south. I found it here, and you'll see over time that it has the most sun on our lot. The next step is to mock up the site location on the ground and monitor the sun exposure throughout the day. If you don't have access to a drone, you can do fine with time-lapsed pictures taken at ground level. Once you have a mock-up of your potential location, like I have here, mocked up with the orange tape, you can just take pictures with your camera and just do it like every hour or every half hour starting in the morning, and take a picture, and then you can go back and look at those pictures and see how the shading throughout the day is going to potentially affect your location. If you're fortunate enough to be located in a place that doesn't have a lot of trees or buildings around, shading is not an issue at all, so you don't really have to go through this approach. But for us to locate the best spot possible amongst all these tall pines, I had to spend quite a bit of effort to find the best place that was the least amount of shading. So you can take those combination of those pictures and then review them later and get a kind of better idea of sort of where things should be located. What size of array, with the Iron Ridge ground mount system, it seems like they kind of tend to lead you towards, first off, the panels in landscape mode, so they're longer than they are tall, and then they're usually either 3, 4, or 5 rows of those across the rectangular shape of the array. We're planning on doing a 4x7 array, so 4 rows coming down on the angle and then 7 columns across the bottom here, and that'll produce 28 panels. The panels are going to be, as I'm spec'd about so far, they'll be 375 watt panels from REC. But regardless, you want to kind of lay it out and see exactly where it's going to sit. You can see that I've got some shadows here. This little pointed shadow that's ending the tape here is the peak of our roof on this end of the house up there. I don't know if you can see that in the sun. So this, I've watched this earlier in the day. It kind of migrates across here a little bit, and it's going to end up shading some corner panels in this area, and that's just a compromise I'm going to have to live with, because I can't move this whole location further this way. I've got a boundary over here. Those little orange flags is the boundary between our property and our neighbors, and our local town code is that I have to set this back 25 feet from the property line, and I think like 50 feet from the front of the road, which is not an issue. But the 25-foot setback brings me back to here, and so I can't really get any further away from the house structure. We've also got a number of trees on this end of our property here, which is a factor as well, and you can see that already the sun, so I'm looking south this way, and the sun rises up on the sort of ridge of the trees over there, and just comes above the trees and then sets over that tree line there. And this is November, so pretty close to the shortest day of the year, and it's not the optimal condition because I'm going to start to lose sun here pretty quickly here, and it's about midday today already, but it's the best that I can do on our property. The rest of the area, so these panels over here would be obviously getting generating power, but I'm going to start to lose it on this side of the array. So my point here is it's important to mock up the location of your array. We did this also to just give our neighbors an idea of what it's going to look like. We don't need their permission, but we just wanted to be good neighbors and say, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing, this is where we're going to locate it. Another thing about locating the array is, ideally you want something on your roof, and this is where you see most solar installations. Our roof configuration really didn't work in terms of azimuth or direction, compass direction. This way is this angle coming down would be great if it was south facing, but it's west facing. So south for us is right down this direction, and in the winter months like this, the sun's coming up right over here and clearing the tops of those pines just a little bit, and then going right back down into that big field of pines. So we get a lot of shade on the roof in the wintertime. This is about noon, and you already see that this side is shaded, and if I were to go around the back side, you can see there's just some remnants, a little bit of sun on the roof there. We've got a dormer that comes out with a little bit of flatter roof. That would be good. I could put panels up there and they would get sun for most, obviously much better in the summertime, but most of the day. But the issue is it's not a lot of real estate up there. I needed more room than that. And also it is facing, that dormer's facing east. And with a ground mount system like we're planning on doing over here, you have a little more option to orient it exactly the direction you want. So that's an advantage. The other thing I like about a ground mount is it's just closer to do maintenance, clear snow off in the winter, do any kind of repairs or checking and all that. And if you ever need to replace your roof, you don't have the panels on top of the roof. So it doesn't work for everybody who needs some space. The lots here in this town are this is more sort of a semi-rural area, so there's a lot of room. Semi-rural also means a lot of trees, and so another option we could have done is done a lot of tree clearing particularly over in this area. We didn't want to take that project on, although you can apply the cost for tree cutting if it's related to your solar project. You can apply that to the 30% federal tax credit. But we would have a lot of empty space there and have to figure out what we're gonna do with all that empty land and stumps and all that kind of stuff. And so this will be an array that's partially shaded in the afternoon here, and in the morning time. When I stand here earlier in the morning, I get a little bit of shade. So again, another reason why it's good to kind of mock out the position before you actually start the project. But we get a little bit of shade from some of the trees, that tall tree up there, and to some extent these trees, but not as much. The other thing to consider, and I would recommend this for most arrays, although I guess if you're out in the open and you really have no shade at all, it would be fine, but is to look at optimizers or microinverters. So those are two options for optimizing an array for any kind of potential shading. This applies to an array that's located on a roof as well, in case you might have a chimney that might shade part of your panel areas. And the optimizers treat each panel separately, so if there's a shading on one panel, it won't affect any more output than just that one panel. If you have several panels connected in series, then shading on any part of one panel will significantly reduce the output of that whole string. And if you have an optimizer, there's little tiny boxes that control the output of just that one panel, then you can have shading and it won't affect the overall output of that whole string. Micro inverters are similar to that. They're actually doing one step further, and they're converting the output of that individual panel to AC current directly at the panel location instead of inside your house where your inverter is located. So those are two approaches to handling shade. So another consideration is the angle of your array towards the sun. So sometimes you'll see this written as azimuth. So the azimuth is the orientation of the panel in a magnetic direction towards north or south. On an ideal world, you want your panels to be facing south. That's true south as opposed to magnetic south. So you want to go online and look at what your magnetic compass deviation is for your location. It's not huge, but if you're trying to get it perfectly located south, you want to take that into consideration. Where we have our array set up here, it's almost exactly facing south, and that way you get the optimal amount of sun exposure on your panels throughout the day. The other thing is the tilt or angle of the panels. And there are tools you can go online to see recommendations for this. A good place to start is looking at your latitude of your location. So we're about 42 degrees latitude here, and so I'm going with a 40-degree angle to tilt of the panels, and that gets everything all averaged out throughout the year and throughout the day, gives you the most direct sun rays on the panel averaged out. You can go with a shallower angle. The steeper angle here in New England is helpful because it does shed snow better. The shallower angle might give you less height to the array if the height is an issue, or aesthetics or whatever. Obviously on a roof you don't have as many options on a pitched roof. You have to go with that angle of that roof. But 40 degrees for us is a good start. You can play around with that a little bit if you go for a steeper angle, say we would go with 45-degree angle, that would give us better production during the winter. When the sun is lower in the sky, that angle is a little bit close to being optimal for the winter time. And the winter time is already a time when you're not going to get a lot of output from your panels, so trying to make a little bit of improvement like that with a tilt angle will help. It'll be a little less output during the summer, but some people say that that's not such a bad thing because you're already getting a lot of output already. So you can play with that a little bit. When I did the numbers on the Iron Ridge online design assistant, as you increase that angle and you have your data in there for max wind speed, it does throw off a lot of the engineering specs, and at 45 degrees or above, I wasn't able to get a good configuration for size of piers and basically wind load on the array. So the flatter the array, the less wind load there is, but the higher snow load. So you're going to want to kind of look at that as well and figure that out and find a compromise there. So ours was using a snow load of 50 pounds per square foot and a wind speed of 110 miles an hour. And that's all assumptions that you can get from your town building department for what they require in your town.
As I mentioned earlier, we started evaluating a 28-panel array of 375 watt panels, or a total of 10.5 kilowatts. So how do we arrive at this size? To answer this question, you'll want to check out our next video in this series, where we walk through the economics of a solar panel system, looking closely at your electrical demand, your likely solar production, and a cost-benefit analysis of going solar. If you enjoyed watching this video, please consider giving us a like, as it really helps others find this kind of content. And lastly, don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell to be notified of our upcoming releases.